We're delighted that we have Mr. Steven Spielberg, who needs no introduction, with us at Headlines today. He's just come in from the US. He'll be spending a few days in India, and he's decided to give us some time. Mr. Spielberg, welcome. Welcome to Headlines today. It's truly a privilege to be speaking to you because, as I was telling you, one has grown up watching your cinema. How does it work? Because from 1978, when Close Encounters was first nominated, till Lincoln, which was nominated the other day, I think every Oscar ceremony in these last 35 years has had Steven Spielberg somewhere.
Well, I hope not, because that's a lot of tuxedos. And that'd be one tux that's getting a lot of use. I don't know, but I've been there a lot because I presented a lot. Not just been in the audience as a nominee, but I've done some presenting at the Academy.
But if one looks at your career over time, there's a lot of science fiction with technology, special effects, etc., which is what you started with, whether it was Jaws or E.T. or Jurassic Park later.
Sure.
And then even the Raiders of the Lost Ark series. But then there is a different genre that you've gone into, which is a more human type of filmmaking, where you've done Schindler's List, you've done
Amistad, or
all sorts of different movies, including Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
So what has happened during this journey of 30 odd years?
Well, it's not a conscious journey. I don't measure out a roadmap and then follow the directions exactly. I don't even have a roadmap. I kind of take each movie as I find interest in something, in a subject. If I'm critically interested in a subject, there'll be a series of movies along those same lines. So after I did Saving Private Ryan, I went to television, and Tom Hanks and I did the miniseries for HBO, Band of Brothers in the Pacific, and now we're doing a miniseries about the 8th Air Force during World War II. So I'll stay on a subject if it really compels me. I can find other compelling stories. But pretty much I don't make a plan, because I think if I made a plan, I would spend too much time in search of not enough time directing something. So I'm much more, open to reacting to something that suddenly out of the clear blue sky appears before me, and I find great interest in it.
What one has noticed over the last few years particularly is that Steven Spielberg is making movies for the Oscars, whether it's Help, whether it's Lincoln. Is there a conscious effort somewhere deep down that you have to make a movie for the Oscars?
I don't think I've ever made a movie for the Oscars. I mean, I've made movies for myself. I made movies I didn't think would make any money, and that I would think would be for myself. But I've never worked for the Oscars or made a movie that I thought I was only making to make it Oscar worthy. You don't know whether your movie is worthy of anything. You don't even know if it's worthy of yourself until you get out of the editing room and take a look at the thing to see if it's an honorable effort. So no, for me, there's no ulterior motive at all. Any choice I've ever made throughout my entire career, I've never had an ulterior motive. There's always a wish list. There's always, especially when I see a movie and I think it's a pretty good movie, I always think, number one, is anybody going to come to see it? And maybe I can fantasize that we could get enough of an audience to make our money back. And then there's always that fantasy, do you think anybody's going to like it? Do you think the critics are going to like it? I think before any of us think about Oscars, we think about, if we have to think about anything other than did we do a good job, it's do you think any of the critics will like it?
Cumulatively, I think you would be the highest grossing director of all time. Close to $9 billion US is what you've delivered at the box office if you adjust gross revenues for Hollywood films that you've made. You're also now, I read the other day, a grandmaster of sorts, because you're mentoring directors who are coming to you. You look at their work, you probably give them inputs on what they need to do, how they can do it better. What's happening in that space?
Well, I've always, I think this is one of the greatest, most collaborative mediums ever invented. It's not like painting. It's not like sculpting. You know what I'm saying? you need a lot of talented people to get a movie on the screen. And so because it's a collaboration, a lot of us look for collaborators, even those that aren't being paid and aren't part of the family making that project. And I've often been asked by friends, will you take a look at a rough cut, let me know what you think of it, or will you take a look at my script, let me know what you think of it. But these are people I know. These are people that I care about and whose work I follow and who I'm fans of. And I ask them the same questions. Will you take a look at my early work? Will you take a look and see if I can improve this in some way? And that's the great thing about this art form. It's only a collaborative art form, but it is a medium that invites a lot of opinions. And I'd rather get opinions from my filmmaker friends and people I truly honor and respect than work in a complete and utter vacuum.
How do you make time for something like this? Because I'm sure you put in a lot of effort when you crystallize an idea and storyboard it, and then of course make the film or the television series depending on what you're doing. So how do you make time for this kind of thing?
It doesn't. It takes a couple of hours to look at a friend's rough cut and give them advice or give them some notes if they ask for the notes. It doesn't take that much time.
Tell us the process of Steven Spielberg's filmmaking. How do you said that an idea fascinates you and then you take that idea forward. How do these ideas come to you? Because I know that you're also a gamer and so there's a lot of tech, you're very tech friendly, if I were to put it that way. So does that have something to do with the final art form that is presented on celluloid?
No, because video games are completely separate art form than movies. Video games don't have any narrative responsibility for telling a linear story. It's just completely experiential. And it's very hard to get emotional about a video game when you're too busy with the adrenaline getting yourself through the minefields that you're navigating yourself through. But I'll just give you an example. You ask me how I get an idea or how I get inspired by something. When I was making Close Encounters, some of which I shot here in Bombay, just outside of Bombay. When I was making Close Encounters, I was shooting the scene where the alien comes off the ship, walks over to Francois Truffaut, does some hand gestures, which I guess means peace and love, and then returns to the ship. And I remember when I was shooting the sequence, and I watched that little creature walk back to the ship, I thought, oh, wait a minute. What if he doesn't get on the ship at all? What if he's a foreign exchange student and Richard Dreyfuss goes on the ship? In exchange for him, the alien stays behind on Earth. Now, I didn't shoot it that way, but I had the idea. Well, that was the genesis for E.T. That's where E.T. was born. He was born during the shot where the little alien in Close Encounters went home.
Now, you said that you came here many, many years ago, 77 or 78, if I remember right.
Early 77, we started shooting here.
And that was your first time in India. And then a few years later, you came and experienced India by traveling all around. And that was in your individual capacity. And I think you did a bit of backpacking as well, hitchhiking and stuff like that. Now, since then, and that's a good 30 years ago, exactly 30 years ago, I think 1983 is when you came. The little bit that you've seen of India, what is your take on India?
Well, in Mumbai, 30 years ago it was Bombay, not Mumbai. 30 years ago there were no huge modern buildings. 30 years ago there wasn't that much that much traffic in the streets. But the constant between my memories of 30 years ago and my experience this week is the beauty of the people, the spiritual beauty of the people, the eye contact they make with us. The fact they're not all running around looking at their cell phones. That there is a real connection of people who recognize that there are other people on the same street. And they're mindful of each other.
So it's not an impersonal city.
It is one of the most personal cities in the entire world.
You spoke about collaboration. Now, this is a unique collaboration. An Indian corporate house invests in DreamWorks and becomes a joint venture partner with Steven Spielberg
and Stacy Snyder.
Stacy Snyder. Equally, now we are seeing Indians playing proper roles in Hollywood cinema. Indians having to provide inputs for Hollywood cinema and doing well. This time's Oscar, for instance, was most notable because there were several Oscar-nominated films which had an Indian connect.
That's right.
So Do you see a greater level of collaboration between the two great cinemas of the world, India and Hollywood?
Well, I do, with The Life of Pi this year, and with Slumdog Millionaire a few years ago, and with so many artists in the different crafts of art direction and cinematography and film scoring, music composition. There's a cross-pollination happening between India and the United States in terms of movies.
Yes.
And I see it happening more and more each year.
Will Steven Spielberg do something which has an India connect in the future? I think you're working on a series, a television series on Napoleon, or that's one of the ideas that...
Well, Baz Luhrmann
yes.
is going to direct for HBO, which I will produce with him, a series about Napoleon based on Stanley Kubrick's script that Stanley wrote in the 1960s.
That's your next project?
Well, it's not my next project, but it's I have a movie company and I have a television company. They're separate.
Okay.
And it's one of the next projects that my television company is doing.
So, as I said, will there be a collaboration with Indian talent?
I would love there to be. I really would love there to be. I mean, there's a movie that we developed at DreamWorks that is about an Indian family, and which I would cast here in India.
You're planning to do something?
This is a movie that I'm producing with Stacy through DreamWorks. That is an Indian story, and part of it would shoot in India, and the other part of it would shoot in France.
Well, what's the timeline on this film?
Maybe 18 months from now.
Okay, and you won't direct it; you'll merely produce it.
Right, produce it.
Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. These were three big names in Hollywood. You seem to be the last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
And now you're competing with the Ang Lees, with the Wong Kar-bys, with Ben Affleck, with a whole new gene pool of talent. And yet you're contemporary. So how do you remain contemporary? That is the crucial thing. That I, for instance, as a child, watched all your cinema. Jaws, E.T., Close Encounters, and of course, you made Harrison Ford into a global star. But one is watching you even today, whether it's Help, whether it's Lincoln, whether it was Saving Private Ryan. So how do you remain contemporary?
I remain contemporary by not being in front of the camera where I would be aging before your eyes if I was on the other side of this art form. And also because I don't think of myself as an older director. I just think of myself as a director, a filmmaker. And so I don't have any sense of my age. I feel as young as the projects that I'm directing. So to me, it's irrelevant.
There's another thing that you did. The studio system, you broke away from the studio system. Creative people like yourself and Jeffrey Katzenberg and David Geffen created a studio or a brand on your own.
Yes.
DreamWorks is a brand that you created on your own, which broke away from the studio system.
Oh, yeah.
That must have taken a lot of courage.
Yeah, I guess so. I just know that we broke away from the studio system to become the studio system.
True.
Yeah.
True.
But it was the first studio, I think, in 65 years that had been formed. And while we were partners, we had probably the best 14 years of our lives working together.
EQ, you made E.T., and that is something that's part of the lexicon. But there's EQ, which is very relevant to Steven Spielberg's body of work. Emotional quotient and emotional connect. How is it that you connect with people of different hues, different ages with your cinema?
Well, look, I don't think there are different people. I think there's different cultures, there's different faiths, there's different traditions, and there's different forms of education. But people are people. In every country, there are more similarities than there are differences. And in that sense, a story that speaks to the world is simply a story that speaks to the human race. And so many movies do that today. And I think it's also because of social media, because the computer and the internet has just sort of shrunk the globe. And we're all neighbors, whereas there were great divides with oceans and deserts between us. Now, there's no excuse for dividing what interests us, and common interests bring us together to speak a common language, which is usually cinema.
So would that be the underlying credo, or would there be something beyond what you just said as the underlying credo of your cinema?
Well, I reserve the right to change the underlying credo if a better credo comes along someday.
Which is what one has seen with you. That
I get to change it.
You're constantly changing.
And I think that keeps me young.
Yeah.
The more I can change, the more I can do things I've never done before, the younger it makes me feel.
But at the same time, you're a very private person. You're a family man. You've kept your family life aside, away from the glare of Hollywood and paparazzi. Both your marriages have been to actresses, but yet you kept a different life for yourself. How have you managed to do that?
Well, my wife gave up acting to be the mom of a very large family, and she's a beautiful painter. My wife is a wonderful artist, and she's an amazing designer. I mean,
This is Kate?
Kate Capshaw Spielberg, and she's a great designer. So she has a business. She has a life outside of being a homemaker. But you know, look, the paparazzi are not interested in me or Kate. We don't make the press. We're the older Hollywood establishment. They go for all the young kids, and more power to them. It's great.
Have you watched a lot of our cinema? Is there something that you're familiar with, something that you like?
Well, I recently, a couple of years ago, saw Three Idiots, which I loved. I mean, it was just a wonderful motion picture. But I'm not as familiar with Indian cinema because we don't get your movies in America. There isn't a channel that shows just, you know, Bollywood films. I know some of the older directors, you know Raj Kapoor and Sanjit Ray, and I know them better than I know some of the younger directors. But I'm also planning to meet a lot of the young filmmakers to become more familiar with the industry.
But it's very important that somebody like you does that, because Hindi cinema, which is bulwark of Indian cinema, has changed dramatically over the last 3-4 years. The kind of scripts, the kind of direction, the kind of ambience that younger directors are bringing to cinema is completely different. And I think you're doing a director's classroom with some of the younger directors, and I think it'll be a great privilege for them and probably an opportunity for you to pick up some threads from there.
It's just the first step, but I hope it opens up a larger conversation about the common language which unites every country, which is cinema. And I hope it just begins a wonderful relationship between me and the whole new generation of filmmakers coming out of India today. I would love that.
So when you do this Hindi film that you've just spoken about, which will be shot in India and France, you will select an Indian cast?
Yes, I will.
So will you and Stacy be looking at different actors?
Well, we're first finding a casting director here in Bombay and in Delhi, and starting that way.
There's also an overhang of the Holocaust in some of your cinema, and Schindler's List for me was something which, actually there are two movies which made me cry. The Passion of Christ, and I watched it in Latin. I didn't understand a thing, but it made me cry. And Schindler's List is another movie which made me cry. You've also made Munich. So is that a genre that you will continue to explore?
Well, I love history. I don't feel that I'm a political filmmaker, but there is inevitable, inescapable politics in all storytelling. I couldn't escape it in Munich. I didn't want to escape it in Lincoln, because it's what it's about. It's about the democratic process, the great experiment in democracy. And it's something that I would like to continue to explore.
So will the next Steven Spielberg film again be historical?
I don't know yet. I'm working on a big science fiction movie about robots. Called Robopocalypse, which I've delayed probably for about 9 to 10 months. And that might be my next picture.
And you'll helm that yourself?
I'll direct that myself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spielberg.
Thank you.
It was truly a pleasure.
It was a great interview, I thought. Thank you. For me too.